Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Clear Company. In case you've missed the drama unfolding, after SHRM CEO Johnny C. Taylor took an aggressive posture at a conference in January, he defended the organization's participation in White House initiatives and associations with individuals some members and now non-members have found objectionable. You can catch up on Twitter by following the hashtag #FixItSHRM. Robin Schooling, she's an SPHR and SHRM SCP. She's a senior HR leader and consultant, writer and speaker. And she tweeted, "While I applaud the goal and support the organization of this initiative, SHRM getting in bed with the Koch brothers has solidified my decision to not renew my membership in February. There are other ways to get this done." End quote. Mark Fogel, GPHR and SHRM SCP, is the co-founder of Human Capital 3.0, a human capital organizational leadership advisory firm. He wrote about the controversy for Fistful of Talent in February, which we'll link to. And he closed in his article and said, quote, "SHRM is a member organization, so it's up to everyone that is a member to weigh in. I am a dreamer, and yes, an optimist, and still believe the society, meaning SHRM, does many important things, including training and keeping us informed on legislative changes. Johnny could be the first SHRM CEO in a long time to really get things done if we make a few adjustments." End quote. This topic is a controversial one, and I hope that you'll take the time to sit through the entire interview where we walk and talk with both Robin and Mark. Well, I wanted to go ahead and welcome Mark back to the Workology Podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Jessica. How are you? And hi, Robin. Good to be on this call with both of you today.
Robin Schooling has chosen not to renew her SHRM membership, while Mark Fogel has decided to work on the inside and maintain his SHRM membership. Today, I'm interviewing both Robin and Mark to get a perspective on the controversy from both sides. Last summer, the #FixItSHRM hashtag was used to condemn a White House photo op between Taylor and President Trump. Taylor was shown shaking hands at an event announcing a pledge to American workers, which is a jobs training initiative. Is this where you think the debate began, or does it go back further than that?
No, I think this is just one of those flashpoints where everything comes to a head. It was very visible, and it certainly made the rounds in the HR social media community. But, and Robin knows this well, as you do, we take this debate back almost 14, 15 years. Johnny and a few key members of the SHRM board several years ago made some changes to bring the board into the 21st century. That included things like stipends and upgraded travel and some other perks, which many SHRM members and former board members were taken back over. So this is not, something that has all of a sudden happened in 2018, 2019. There have been situations, and Johnny was the flashpoint, quite frankly, back then as well. So many people have a lingering taste or bad taste with Johnny, and to some extent, even I do, although we'll talk about this later. I've had some good direct conversations with Johnny, and I think that's because I'm still on the inside. I haven't walked away from SHRM, and I think that we have more leverage by doing so, by being insiders.
So when you talk about some of the changes for the board with the compensation and the travel and some of the controversy surrounding, you're talking about the SHRM Members for Transparency group that kind of grew from that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And I know Robin and I both were involved in hearing and being knowledgeable about that, and many of our fellow social community brethren were also in the middle of that. And that goes back a few years as well. And that was really the beginning of HR folks wanting to have a voice and wanting to give their opinion where they disagreed with what SHRM had done. And I think that in any situation, you could be a Democrat or a Republican or independent or any party, we're not always going to agree. The problem is when not agreeing leads to actions that people feel are detrimental to the HR community. So this is a polarizing conversation, and I think the picture was a flashpoint that really brought it to a head and got some folks really thinking about, we just can't keep having this discussion in the same way. We have to change the battle lines.
Is this where you think the debate began, or does it go back further than that?
I think it goes back further than that. SHRM is a huge organization, and I've been involved for well over 20 years. They try to be everything to everybody, and, ultimately there's no way they're going to please all 350,000 or whatever the number is members. I get that. And I think that we've seen that over the years under various regimes. It's not just now. We had the SHRM members for transparency kerfuffle years ago. There was the hullabaloo over cutting ties, with HRCI. So these sorts of things surface fairly regularly. But, that moment of the photo, to me, and I think to others, to me it was like a visual punch in the gut. It was bad optics. But beyond just the photo, what was clear to me, or what was becoming clear to me, was at these events, which, sort of started to follow swifter and swifter after that, the SHRM CEO was using his role to promote himself, was how I saw it, and promoting himself by cozying up to this president and this administration. Beyond that, beyond just the photo, the actual substance, I found the actual substance of what Johnny C. Taylor said there was kind of ridiculous as well. Yes, should HR folks be part of a discussion around jobs training? Absolutely, hooray. But his presentation, his announcement there was that SHRM was pledging to create jobs, which we don't do that. But SHRM was pledging to create jobs by ensuring more HR professionals got the SHRM certification. So the message was absolutely ridiculous as well. And the photo was just, like I said, a visual punch in the gut. That event certainly got people talking. The photo got people talking. At that time, personally, I filed it away in my brain to see what else would happen.
In the most recent flurry of comments about SHRM and its relationship with the Koch brothers, what do you see as the crux of the issue? Is this strictly political?
I would not go as far as saying that it's strictly political, but I do believe that many folks have drawn a political line. They've taken the photo op to be that Johnny wants to play on President Trump's team. The Koch brothers have been well known to be politically active in conservative Republican circles, but I do want to bring a different point of view to this. I worked for a nonprofit running HR for 2 years in the charter school world in New York City. Recently, only a couple of years ago, we had many benefactors that were worked in the hedge fund investment world, CEOs with billion-dollar bank accounts, and they were donating lots of money to our organization where, from a political standpoint, their views in the broader sense were very different from our own political activity. Sometimes when you need to get things done, you have strange bedfellows. And I think that in this case, SHRM looked to have corporate sponsorship to meet an agenda on a broader basis. I don't think the issue is so much that it's the Koch brothers. I think it's the viewpoint of us taking money from one side of the aisle. So, I'm sure Robin will have a viewpoint on that as well.
No one can dispute that, one's tendency to agree or disagree with the Koch brothers' activities, is often going to center around political leanings. I think we can't dispute that. To me, these have always been folks who oppose climate change legislation. They're avowed climate change deniers. They ran sort of these snaky campaigns opposing the ACA back in the day, and they generally advocate for minimal social services for the needy. Those things speak to me as a human being, as a citizen of the U.S. I feel compelled to stand up or speak out when I believe there's something that is not right or honest or good. So political, yes. We live in a political world. It didn't help, though, following, kind of on the heels of that, when Johnny Taylor then invited Ivanka Trump to be a surprise guest, because she was a surprise guest at the SHRM legislative event. She's the face of the administration. She's one of the faces of the administration, and people have a very visceral reaction to this president and this administration. And she's the face to many people of an administration that separates families and puts kids in cages. She's the face of an administration that's systematically stripping rights away from citizens, especially, we look at LGBT citizens. This is an administration that she's the face of that believes there are Nazis and white supremacists who are, quote, very fine people. So is it political? Yes, but I think it transcends politics.
Robin, what are your expectations within the HR community for organizations like SHRM?
I've been a member of SHRM, local, national, very involved for, like I said, 20 plus years. As a practitioner, as an HR practitioner, I have always wanted and used SHRM for resources and access to information. For me, that has been my primary, what I want from SHRM. I want them to provide me information and tools to do my job. I have never, I can tell you one thing I have never been enamored of over the many years is SHRM's lobbying activities. They have the A team, the advocacy team. They encourage, not just on the national level, but at the state and local level, folks to, have legislative day and go run around Capitol Hill or your local, government offices. And that, I always had issues with that because, that's not just on the national level where they have politicized things. SHRM has politicized things. I served on my state council for about a dozen years. And each year, when the state legislature introduced the bills, the state council, and thus by extension all chapters, picked bills that were going to be, going through committees and whatnot, picked bills to oppose or support. And as tended to be with my state council, everything that was chosen to support, everything was pro-business and not pro-people. And that never sat well with me. And I can remember in 2010, and I remember the year because it was actually, we were having the meeting the day that the Deepwater Horizon spill happened, so I'll never forget it. We were sitting there with, 20 or so members of the state council talking about the upcoming legislative session and what we were going to oppose or support. And I was the only opposing member, 20 people sitting there. I was the only person who did not want us to oppose a bill that would provide victims of domestic violence to receive unemployment payments if they had to quit their job because, they were a victim of domestic violence. And in the scheme of things, that's not a whole lot of money. The argument from my fellow HR professionals sitting on the state council was, oh, well, no, we have to oppose that because we don't, it's a money thing and we don't need to pay people more things for not coming to work. I was appalled. And it really, obviously this is like almost 10 years ago. It struck with me. It was like a punch in the gut to hear people who work with people discard and discount domestic violence as something that people would go through. It bothered me tremendously. I don't think that that's SHRM's role. I don't think SHRM should be in there lobbying necessarily for things, but when they do, it the prism through which they do it is jacked up quite often.
I think that a lot of people, at least I didn't early on in my HR career, understand what was happening in terms of SHRM as the member organization being involved in politics and even having a lobbyist until I started to be involved as a member of the blog squad and then the state council myself.
Yeah, I think the average member, if you will, is unaware to the extent. And SHRM has been, so I vacillate. I give them credit where credit is due. The plus of the A-Team and the whole rollout of that, which was, 5-6 years ago, they started using that moniker. The plus of it is they did put front and center in front of members, in front of HR professionals, hey, pay attention to this stuff. It's important that you stay educated around legislative issues. I'm all for promoting the awareness piece of that. Hey, this is important. Learn it. Be aware. It's do this constant environmental scan. Pay attention to the political landscape and how that impacts your workplace or your employees or your business. But I think the part, again, like you said, that the average member does not really care about or understand is the vast wheels of the kind of lobbying efforts that occur up there on Duke Street.
It will be really interesting during this next presidential election how SHRM is involved personally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast, sponsored by Clear Company. Today, we are talking with Robin Schooling and Mark Fogel about the recent controversy surrounding SHRM and its partnership with conservative politicians and donors. Negative attention seemed to fuel the controversy. How do you think SHRM should handle this moving forward? How can we come back together as a community, and how should we facilitate that?
This podcast is sponsored by Clear Company, the fastest growing talent management system on the market, and recently won G2 Crowd's #1 user recommended Winter 2018 award. Visit clearcompany.com to learn more.
The announcement made by SHRM after receiving negative attention seemed to fuel the controversy. How do you think SHRM should handle this moving forward? How can we come back together as a community, and how should we facilitate that?
I think there's still hope for SHRM to kind of answer some questions and get folks back to the discussion. Frankly, all that I wanted, and based on conversations with other sort of disenchanted members, was the opportunity to have dialogue. When these things started to surface, and it was like, hey, bad optics, ooh, don't like that decision. Wait, you're doing what? And you're putting this out there, and when we as individuals started to see that disconnect, it would have been very easy at that time. This is a year ago. It would have been easy for Johnny Taylor or a representative to reach out and arrange a call, a virtual gathering, whatever. In years past, with things of much less importance, really, SHRM did that. They would reach out and they would have conversations with members and volunteer leaders and want to hear from them directly, individually or as a kind of a group, a roundtable thing. But that didn't happen. Instead, they dug their heels in. Really, is how it from the outside looking to them. That's kind of what it looks like. Instead, what happened is SHRM Emily, I forget her name, that's her Twitter handle, who's Johnny Taylor's chief of staff, she blocked people on Twitter last month. There was an announcement that she put out on Twitter about SHRM, supporting of, hey, we're glad to be, I'm paraphrasing, working with this administration on immigration. And I happened to see it, and, as did other people, and I was just incredulous. And, because this is, it was, again, what do you mean by that? This is an administration that to many, when you talk about immigration, it's keeping people out based on religion, it's separating families, it's putting kids in cages, it's all the horrible things. And this blithe little comment that she made was disconcerting. And when people started to question it or share it or respond with comments on Twitter, she blocked people. Blocked. That's not having a dialogue. That is the opposite of repairing or repairing the relationship.
We're on the heels of the SHRM annual conference. So both Mark and I were there yesterday. And so we're recording this just with all of this fresh in our minds. Having spent some time with Johnny in the Bloggers Lounge, I will just say that that was, out of the 10 years that I have been a member of the Blog Squad, that is the longest amount of time that any CEO has spent with the group of bloggers. And he spent approximately 40 minutes with us, which I was very happy about. And he answered many questions for us and was really open to conversation. So it was a nice change to see.
Yes, and to add to that, Jessica, I won't. I think that he was very honest and open. I think that he is well aware of this movement afoot. But he also said that he's not going to address certain things publicly, and that's his prerogative to do so. So even by stating that to us, he was showing his cards. If you like him or dislike him, he had the fortitude to come into a room with some folks that he knew some of us had different political views. I even pointed out to him at the beginning of the conversation, before many folks walked over, that I had written the FOT article, and I was still sitting in the lounge writing about the conference because I thought it was important to do so. So, yes, it was good. I think, though, that was a good first step. I think there needs to be more of that, not just with Johnny, but with the entire leadership team at SHRM, and also with the board. We spent a lot of time with a gentleman by the name of Steve Brown. He is the people's representative on the SHRM board of directors. He does what we've all done. He runs HR functions for a mid-sized company. They're not a Fortune 500. He gets us. We need more voices, not just on the board, but at every level of the HR community. So we'll see what happens, but it was a great first step.
The announcement made by SHRM after receiving negative attention seemed to fuel the controversy. How do you think SHRM should handle this moving forward? How can we come back together as a community, and how should we facilitate that?
I think there's still hope for SHRM to kind of answer some questions and get folks back to the discussion. Frankly, all that I wanted, and based on conversations with other sort of disenchanted members, was the opportunity to have dialogue. When these things started to surface, and it was like, hey, bad optics, ooh, don't like that decision. Wait, you're doing what? And you're putting this out there, and when we as individuals started to see that disconnect, it would have been very easy at that time. This is a year ago. It would have been easy for Johnny Taylor or a representative to reach out and arrange a call, a virtual gathering, whatever. In years past, with things of much less importance, really, SHRM did that. They would reach out and they would have conversations with members and volunteer leaders and want to hear from them directly, individually or as a kind of a group, a roundtable thing. But that didn't happen. Instead, they dug their heels in. Really, is how it from the outside looking to them. That's kind of what it looks like. Instead, what happened is SHRM Emily, I forget her name, that's her Twitter handle, who's Johnny Taylor's chief of staff. There was an announcement that she put out on Twitter about SHRM supporting of, hey, we're glad to be, I'm paraphrasing, working with this administration on immigration. And I happened to see it, and, as did other people, and I was just incredulous. And, because this is, it was, again, what do you mean by that? This is an administration that to many, when you talk about immigration, it's keeping people out based on religion, it's separating families, it's putting kids in cages, it's all the horrible things. And this blithe little comment that she made was disconcerting. And when people started to question it or share it or respond with comments on Twitter, she blocked people. Blocked. That's not having a dialogue. That is the opposite of repairing repairing the relationship.
I would like to see SHRM do what you described, because we did that. We had the announcement when HRCI and SHRM split. They had a conference call where they kind of talked and answered questions. But you're right, there hasn't been anything like that, and I feel that it does need to happen.
Yeah.
Many members have chosen to cut ties with SHRM altogether, and considering that SHRM certification really drives careers, and the education offered by SHRM is the largest source of continuing education for HR professionals, what would you tell people who are new to HR or considering HR as a field?
I continue to receive this question. I've received it in the months since I personally made the decision to not renew national or local and have kind of removed myself. I have people ask me, should I'm a newbie coming into HR, should I join SHRM and whatever? And I tell people, they need to make their own decision. And I can speak, and I do speak factually about SHRM as a resource, and I've always done that. I will tell people, this may meet your needs. This may be good for you at this stage in your career. Here's the value you may receive from national membership. Here's the value you may receive from your local chapter membership. But I also tell them why I have chosen to no longer affiliate myself with SHRM. So I can speak about, and maybe it's because at one point I was so embedded, and I was in charge of membership for many years. There is value to be had there, but I'm also going to tell people this is why I personally have not continued my affiliation with them. There are other resources out there where I can access information or learning or education or whatever, and I choose to go with them.
Is it different post-controversy than, say, 5 years ago?
Well, I would be, I'm honest about it. I tell folks that SHRM is at a very different place than it was 5 years ago. With that said, I do believe that as a single go-to source, if you are an emerging HR leader, their certification prep is very good. I've taught both, and at a full, transparency on my end, I've done the HRCI program in the past. I've taught recently the SHRM prep, so I've been on both sides of that aisle. And at this point, I feel that there are many aspects of SHRM learning on a direct level for their certification that is the better choice. But I also think that they have some very good content out there, but they're not the only player in town. So I don't believe in one-stop shopping. We live in a world of fragmentation. There are folks like yourself at Workology and other organizations that have some great on-demand learning, webinars, live, in-person training, all different vehicles to deliver content so that folks can become educated and can grow. And I'm a lifelong learner. I'm a college professor part-time. I teach HR classes in an MBA program locally on Long Island. And I started doing it when I was a CHRO because that's my give back. I like to write. It's cathartic to me. But I also believe that education is the key to any individual being successful and growing, and that you should always be learning and growing. And SHRM needs to be not all of that, not all inclusive. There are other organizations out there like World at Work and ATD, and there are some pay-for-play organizations that do some nice work too. They all need to be in your toolbox. They all need to be on your playlist. But I do think that SHRM, from a networking standpoint, look, this past week, where else can you go and have 20,000 people who all have a connection to you, even if they come from completely different backgrounds and see the world completely different? There's nowhere else that you can do that, right? And considering that there's somewhere, I don't know what the exact number is, maybe 300,000 people belong to SHRM today, and they're finally starting to go global, that I think that it's a big miss if you work in the HR community to not be a part of it, not participate, and not have a voice. Because it's a lot harder to get your point, to get people convinced that they're doing something wrong when you're not part of the everyday conversation. I feel much more comfortable saying to Johnny or others, I don't agree with you, and here's another point of view. Can you at least listen to the idea? As opposed to, I'm not a member and I'm going to look at you from the outside because I don't like your viewpoint. So, that's how I see it. I think that SHRM needs to be not the soul, but definitely a piece of every HR practitioner's playlist.
Mark and I had the opportunity to talk with the CEO of SHRM, Johnny C. Taylor, at the SHRM annual conference. However, you didn't attend the conference. If you could speak to Johnny C. Taylor directly, let's assume that their communications team and maybe Johnny is listening now. What advice would you give them? How can we help bring everyone together into the SHRM and HR community again?
I think the underlying issue is we're a professional organization. Setting standards for behavior. It's not just knowledge. It's how do we expect ourselves as HR professionals, as HR leaders, to act and interact and do our work. And as HR professionals, we should lead by doing the right thing. We have an obligation to call out bad behavior in our organizations, discrimination, harassment, ethical transgressions, what have you. We would not tolerate a leader or a partnership with a leader who is, and here I'm going to sound political, but I think these are factual. We would not tolerate a leader or a partner who was a liar, an admitted perpetrator of sexual assault, and we would not tolerate a human being partnering with us who has mocked individuals with disabilities or veterans, among others. And one of the ironies that I saw, and I think that Johnny C. Taylor and SHRM needs to think very deeply about this. I saw a celebration from afar happening at SHRM Annual, talking about providing opportunities for people with disabilities, for veterans, bringing people into or back into the workforce. And how can we stand there as a professional organization and say, this is what we believe in and this is what you should do, and at the same time have this very visual, connected relationship with an administration that stands for everything but that. That's some soul searching. That's looking at what leadership of SHRM should do, should ask themselves.
Each industry has its ups and downs with regard to member organizations. However, human resources is unique in that it is a sector of professionals that isn't industry specific. Educationally and historically, organizations offering certification in the HR field have had a great deal of power, and they are also self-regulated. The collective voice can also be just as powerful. I appreciate Robin and Mark discussing the great SHRM debate with me today. I am also very interested to see how SHRM will be involved in the upcoming presidential election. This isn't the last of the conversation on any of the topics that we talked about today, but I do hope that this helps facilitate discussion and conversation among those within our HR community and those within the SHRM organization too. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Clear Company. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.